You're listening to Inclusive AF with Jackye Clayton and Katee Van Horn.
Hi, Jackie.
Hi, Katie Sue.
How are things today for you?
Um, Fair to Midland. That's
Okay.
just keeping that generic phrase. We're doing all right.
No, I Fair to Midland is good. I think for those of you who are listening, this is the Inclusive AF podcast, and I'm Katee Van Horn.
And I am Jackye Clayton.
And I think it's been a little bit of an action-packed couple of weeks, Jackie, for you
Let's,
and for me. Not that it's not
yeah,
action-packed for everyone, but lots going on in the world today, and we're really excited to have a wonderful guest with us to share a little bit about herself and all the cool stuff she's written. So, Ruchika, would love to turn it over to you to have you introduce yourself and share a little about who you are.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Katie and Jackie, for having me on Inclusive AF, which I love the name of. Everyone, my name is Ruchika T. Malhotra. I am an inclusion strategist. I run a strategy practice that advises leaders and organizations on creating effective, good cultures called Candor. I'm also the author of 3 books. You may have read my last one, Inclusion on Purpose, and my newest one is called Uncompete, out November 4th.
which I'm dying to read because I don't even know what that means. Like I was born at 1201. Like I was born into this world with competition, trying to be the first of May 30th, like right in there. And I've been competing ever since. So I can't wait to read your new book.
Oh, thank you, Jackie. I mean, I think, it's interesting when I started writing this book, and, I'm sure we'll get into a big conversation about it. But when I started writing this book, what I started realizing is, yes, there are people who think they're competitive and they're not. And that's, of course, like that makes sense. I certainly do. And I can go into the sort of background that has made me very competitive and made me relearn or rethink some of the ideas. But what you start to also realize is a lot of the rules are based around competition that we don't even question, right? Like they could be the most like mundane, thing that could have a big impact. Like, hey, I'm not going to let the person trying to cut in front of me. I mean, and then this is real talk right now because I was like driving, rushing to get here. I wanted to record from my studio at home. So I was like driving really fast and someone's trying to cut in front of me. And I'm like, not today, sucker. And then later I was like, okay, because every time I do that now because of this book, I'm like starting to think, I'm like, gosh, that could have ended really dangerously, right? And for what? For
Yeah.
what? Right. So anyway, I know we're going to have a lot to talk about.
Yes, absolutely. So I actually want to start with your last book. And I would love for you to share a little bit about kind of since you've written that book, what have you learned? What are those insights that you've heard now from readers that you're like, oh, I didn't, this is something I didn't expect to hear back from readers, or what are those things, those insights that you've received, like just from that book?
Thank you, Katie. So I have to say, with inclusion on purpose, I'm a very data-driven person. I really wanted to collate the data. So what I was hearing from, I'll back up. What I was hearing from my clients and especially people around me was this idea, like, I believe in the importance of having, different people from different backgrounds, diverse backgrounds, being included and welcomed and like they belong and they're safe in the workplace and that they can advance fairly. All of those things. Believe in that in theory. In practice, I don't know the how, right? So can you give me some tools that will help me figure out the how? So that was the idea when I wrote Inclusion on Purpose. I was like, oh, it's great. I'm going to I have all this good data. I remember it all the time. Like I'm thinking about it all the time. I'm going to just put it in a book. And what moved me and what was very surprising for me after the book came out is how much people said, actually, Ruchika, what really made a difference were all the stories. You collated and you wrote stories of these women from around the globe who have struggled and who have experienced, whether it's the pay gap or the leadership gap or have been overlooked for a promotion, like all of these stories that I wanted to use to really illustrate how the workplace is different based on your identities and especially your intersectional identities. And I think that really both surprised me and also reminded me, like, there's such a power in stories, right? Like, we think that if we tell people, oh, the gender pay gap is whatever it is, or like, there are more, what was this? I think there was a study that said, from McKinsey, that said that, organizations that have gender diversity in the C-suite and in leadership, and this was a global study from McKinsey a few years ago, there's a correlation between, a 15% rise in sort of profitability and financial gains. I always thought, like, oh, like a leader will read that and they'll be like, oh, great, profits, let's go. But it was actually really those stories that seemed to have moved hearts and minds, and that was wonderful to see, honestly.
And I think that, that just goes to, it's a lot easier to other people and dislike people that you don't relate to because you like, oh, that's those people over there, versus once you start hearing individual stories, hearing individual experiences, it makes it more real for people. Where the data is great, of course, yes, and we want to see that data, and we want to understand, how do these different pieces come into play, and how do these different data points really push us. But yeah, I think it's those stories that do make such an impact, and really help us to think about, what is the bias that we're living in today, and how does that impact not just the bigger picture, the 10,000-foot view, but that day in and day out. So I love that you share the stories.
Thank you. And I just want to say that the other thing that really was surprising, and this is now, the book is over 3.5 years old,
Mhm.
is it still seems to resonate. And I know we're in a really tricky time right now where there is some questioning, even among people, I think, who believed in it, at least theoretically. There's questioning, like, does DEI matter? Does inclusion matter? Like, have we, quote, gone too far? And even in times like this, I think it means a lot to know that a book like Inclusion on Purpose and building on the body of so many awesome leaders works. Like, I know that there are still people really committed to this, and that matters a lot right now.
I think, what we've seen and what we've heard so much is that organizations don't understand that inclusion on purpose is not the same as a quota,
Yeah.
right? And I think that was the important part. And also the irony of ironies is how many people, as we came into 2025, all of a sudden started holding their breath and are just waiting for a time to relax. And it just keeps getting tighter and tighter and tighter, and live in fear because of another group living in fear, like not wanting to live in fear, understanding how destructive that can be, and then creating it for the other person. It feels a lot better if it happens to you and not to me. And without understanding how we can all come together, I find I find it fascinating and also terrifying at the same time. What else have you seen as you've been doing this work for such a long time? Have you seen either change or additional enlightenment since Inclusion on Purpose came out?
That's a really good question. So my hope with Inclusion on Purpose was this belief and wanting to communicate the fact that it really starts with you as an individual, and especially working so closely with so many HR functions, so many HR leaders and talent, and especially folks around the globe. What I realized is a lot of people really want to do the right thing. I think that there is, and even in the book I write about, and Jackye, I'm like thinking of your lovely t-shirt there, go ahead, call HR.
Yeah.
Everyone loves to hate on HR. I mean, I literally wrote those words in Inclusion on Purpose. And what I realized is actually, more often than not, I have been really lucky to connect with people who really have like good intentions, good, want to do good for the organization, but also want to do good for people, want to be humane and want to be compassionate. And sometimes there is a tension between what is seen as like the organization's goals and the individual leader's goals, right? And I've seen HR be, kind of pitted against the organization or have to make a choice. And I think that is what has evolved into what became the next book, which is Uncompete, right? That do things have to really be zero sum? Is it always one person wins and the other person loses? Is it always winner take all? Is it always zero sum? And I believe it's not. And again, very much from the idea of working with people who really do have that idea, like they are very principled individuals who are willing to fight. But again, why have we created a system which pits people against each other?
I think that's such a great question. And it's a conversation that I think we've had with a few folks that have been on the podcast in the past is, instead of it being let's all work together and there's, enough pie, enough pizza, enough whatever it is to go around, it does become this, oh no, if you get something, then I don't. And, there's this tension there that I just don't think needs to be there.
Mm.
But, shifting to the Uncompete, your book Uncompete, would love to hear a little bit more, if for folks that are listening, you can go to Ruchika's website and get the framework. And so I would love for you to talk us through kind of how you came up with this framework. Tell us a little bit about it.
Yeah. So Uncompete, rejecting competition to unlock success. The idea was very much, and it's simple. And when I say it, many people intuitively get it. By the way, the word uncompete isn't a real word in English. So I take a lot of joy and pride that someone who learned English as a second language has coined a new word.
I like it. We like it.
that is
Yes.
that is currently under trademark review. So we'll see what
Nice.
happens.
Perfect. Perfect.
But the idea of uncompete really, again, is rejecting the idea that like you always have to compete to be successful and to create successful organizations and to create successful societies. And in fact, that there's a lot more abundance and a lot more that can be achieved when we collaborate and work together. So it sounds intuitive. And actually, when I say it to people, they're like, yeah, of course, uncompete, that makes total sense. And what I realized as I was writing the book, and I kind of teased this when we were talking earlier, is like it is everywhere, right? Like I bet we can think of like I use the example of I have a 9-year-old son. Since he was real like little baby, I remember going to, parents gatherings, caregiver gatherings, and people would be like, oh, like my child does 6 extracurricular activities so that in 12 years or 15 years when they apply for college, like they'll be ahead. And I'm like, but your kid is 4, like hello, so from there to like, where did you go to school and like which degree matters more, all the way to absolutely in the workplace, the way we're pitted against each other to be rivals instead of collaborate, all the way to society and kind of even innovation without a thought to like what are the impacts on, the environment or on society, et cetera, et cetera. So I started realizing that it almost feels like circles that like encircle each other and kind of mushroom out from that, which is, we think competition, yes, there's bad competition, but I don't engage in like the bad competition. But what we start to realize is actually there's a lot of like ideals that we all subscribe to almost on autopilot without questioning, like are they really serving us? And again, for specifically like an audience that thinks a lot about like talent management and HR, I have to say, like, I'm always intrigued the way, when I hear these stories of like sabotaging people who should be collaborating, sabotage each other. They feel like they're, they have to be rivals with each other. I can't wait till y'all read the book because I start literally the first story I start with in the book, learning from inclusion on purpose, stories matter. So the first story that I start off with is like more than 2 decades old. I was part of an organization in the communication department. I was young and early in my career. I befriended a young, woman also early in her career. We became like really good, like BFF, work friends, work wives, whatever the term would become later on. And I shared an idea with her that I was like, I think we should really do this as a department. She was like, yeah, definitely. And then a couple of weeks later, I walk into a department meeting and she gets the credit for she basically has shared this, my idea. Everyone's applauding, everyone's really excited. with no credit to me. And even now, when I think back to that experience, what I remember so clearly is, of course, I was shocked, I was betrayed. I was like, oh my God, that's terrible. But actually, rather than discuss with her, like, hey, what happened? Like, where did the communication break down? Like, what happened? My instinct was like, oh, I need to have sharper elbows for next time. I gotta like guard my like ideas. I gotta like not trust people. I gotta be, like all of those tapes started playing before the one that was like, what went wrong here? Like, is there a way that we could sort this out? You know what I mean?
Right.
And if only people could learn how to advocate for themselves in those moments where that's the scariest part, right?
Mhm.
It's easier to do, like, to point instead of to say, oh, well, that would have been a great opportunity for me to say, I remember when we talked about this 3 months ago. I'm glad we're able to incorporate it because it's still a good idea. But now all of a sudden we hate the idea, even though it's brilliant. And
Great
I
point.
can, yeah, I think that part is difficult. And I'm curious of your opinion. This feels kind of random, but I've been thinking about it a lot this week, especially in preparation for having you on the show, about the staff at a lot of organizations saying HR only cares about the organization. Yeah. And you work at the organization without caring about me personally. Like, understanding, do you think that the word human in human resources still has a place? Is that the right word? Do we need to go back to like personnel so people don't feel like, oh,
No,
he's
please
not.
don't. Please don't. Please don't.
Oh, I
I mean,
hope
the
so.
reason I ask is because so many people say, I thought it was human resources and you don't even care about me. It's like, no, I do care about you. And this is how we have to go. So it makes me think about those inner competitions that we have to deal with on a regular basis.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I don't want the name to change. And I think it is really important to keep the human in human resources and for human resources to behave humanely. Because I think one of the challenges I have is people can sometimes there's this perspective and people can hate on HR, but we see bad and good practices. And again, I'm careful to just like
Sure.
blanket call something bad and good, but we see ethical and humane versus non-ethical and non-humane practices across the organization, not just HR. And I have to say, one of the most like formative experiences I had, like also early in my career, and it's nice to like when you have a couple of decades to look back on, you're like, oh, like I remember what worked and what didn't. I remember hearing her name is Daisy Auger Dominguez. She's an incredible HR leader. Jackye, you're nodding your head. Like I'll never forget. It was, I want to say like maybe it was exactly 10 years ago. I had gone to a conference and I had left a job in technology and I was kind of like, I don't know what's coming next. And I'd gone to this conference. Daisy was on a panel. I told her this story and she like, of course, doesn't remember. She's a featured speaker. And she talked about how, sometimes in talent acquisition, conversations, if someone lowballed them their offer, right, they were like, oh yeah, I'm ready to take whatever it is, she would actually like stop them in that moment and tell them, no, you should ask for more, or no, like this is what you're worth, right? And because she could understand that sometimes the way we've been socialized as women, as people of color, as people with other intersectional marginalized identities, is you don't advocate for yourself, or you face barriers and bias when you advocate for yourself. I want to do the both and, right? Because I've definitely seen and I have been in those camps of women who later on in my career absolutely advocated for myself and was called difficult and all sorts of fun words. And so I think HR has a very important role to play. I think talent acquisition has a very important role to play. The question is, can you do it, with humanity, with compassion, and ethically? And I don't think, again, it's an us versus them. I think any organization also wants to have people who feel welcome and like they're being treated ethically and humanely. So it is a win-win, but the narratives are sort of pitted against each other.
Well, I think that's also we talk about everyone having bias. There's also the factor of like the bias that you learn can also be applied to yourself.
Mhm.
And so like the way that you're like, oh, a woman should be this, a white woman should be this, or a single woman or whatever, whatever categories you can check mark for yourself. There are those things that you're like, oh my God, like I'm thinking about what you were just talking about with kind of that scarcity mindset and having that colleague of yours steal your idea or, take your idea, whatever you want to
Yeah,
call
yeah, steal
it.
it. I mean, come on, let's be real now.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, but it's also that like the whole concept of we've been taught that knowledge is power, and
Mm,
that if we have knowledge and someone else doesn't, we have power over them. And so
mhm.
it's also that whole concept of, yeah, I know more than you do, but like going back to the negotiation piece, women have been taught you don't negotiate.
No.
And I have been on the other side, on the HR generalist side, when I've had recruiters literally come to me and be like, she's being really difficult. She keeps trying to
Mhm.
negotiate. And I'm like, okay, well, if a man was doing this, would you feel the same way? And the answer is no. And
Right.
Mhm.
it's such a fascinating, well, I shouldn't even say fascinating. It's an unfortunate piece of this bias that just
Yeah.
resonates
Yeah.
with everything and that
Yeah.
competition that's constantly there.
Yeah. And actually, Katie, I would love to take a pause in that and like sort of double down. One of the things I think we can really do is actually a tip I wrote in Inclusion on Purpose that was sort of named and framed by Catherine Pressner. She works for a large pharmaceutical organization in Europe.
Mhm.
Great TEDx talk about this as well. And essentially, the idea is called flip it to test it. And that is exactly this, right? Like if someone is being quote unquote difficult in a salary negotiation, the question is if you flip their gender or you flip their race or you flip, any other part, like they're single versus they're married, it's that and then that helps you identify, like, would you use the same words, right? I'll never forget the sort of clip that goes viral on social media every few years of like Oprah Winfrey being told like she should just be grateful for getting less money
Mhm.
because she's a single woman and her
Yep.
colleague is a married man with kids. And you're like, what? And the reality is things haven't, I mean, yes, they've changed to some extent, and also no, they've not. I mean, you two more than me would have seen this, up close. So again, it's that question of like, what is my role as an individual, but also as a collective within this organization to drive the change that I believe in?
I can tell you absolutely for sure that is still, I've literally had conversations recently with leaders about like, great that that person is married and he has a family and all of these things, but let's keep to the work. What are they doing? What are they actually, what are the outcomes they're achieving? And yeah, and Kristen, yeah, she's awesome. I love her, all of her work.
Yeah.
I think it's one of those things though that people just don't even realize what's coming out of their mouth
Mm,
a lot of
mm,
times.
mm, mm.
So it is truly it's an unconscious bias for sure, but it is just really being able to push on some of these things and question some of these things to get people to think about this differently. So I
Yeah.
think that's really the piece that I have always found to be helpful is just asking the question and asking more questions about why. So yeah, absolutely.
And I don't even know if I was taught that. Like I was thinking about it. I don't think I was taught. It was just like a knee-jerk reaction of it, something feeling like it's not going in my favor and then being like pulling back. And I think what's interesting is that as you learn and as you have more experience working in,
Mm,
just working in general,
Mhm.
you learn more about what is fair and what you're willing to do or what you're able
Mhm.
to do in those moments. I had an interview recently and we had a difference of opinion. It was during an interview and there was a pause, an awkward pause, and I said, I'm sure this is the part where I'm supposed to like say that you're right and I'm wrong, but I'm really right. Like you need to know in this moment, I'm really, really right.
I'm really
Like
right.
I'm not backing off on this. This is the hill
I
for
love
me.
this.
Yeah.
about talent acquisition and salaries and getting everything approved and understanding headcount, which is a lot. That's a whole nother podcast.
Mm.
But of understanding and being able to do that and learning that it's okay. I mean, I love Gary Vee. He said when he went to his first public speaking, he was like, "Oh, I asked for $1,000," and he was like, "Oh, that's really cheap." He goes, "Is my starting fee? It's really $5,000." And he was like, learned how to push and just
Mm.
kept pushing. Um, and so I think it's kind of like that when you're like flipping it and
Yeah.
also just testing it, see
Yeah.
what happens.
Yeah. And Jack and Katie, I do want to add like this is where like this idea, this framework, this philosophy of like competition doesn't have to be the default in every situation means a lot. So I mean, since we're talking about salary negotiation, let's talk more. Years ago when I was working at an organization, I negotiated. I'm married to a man in technology, so I realized like, okay, negotiation is very much the way that like you have to do it all the time. So I have to say I'm pretty comfortable now. For years I wasn't. It's a skill, right? And that's the other thing is really important for people who might think like it's either inborn or it's not. It's really not. It's very much a cultivated skill, and especially if you've historically been taught like just be grateful and keep on moving. But so I negotiated, and then the person who was my hiring manager said like, okay, this is like a secret though, don't tell other people that you got the higher salary. So I was like, okay, guess what I'm going to do? So
Right.
the
Right.
next person who applied for a different role, like within the same department, she reached out to me. She said, hey, I've seen that you've been here for a while. Just wanted to check, like, wanted to check what salary numbers are like. And I said to her, I said, this is what I'm getting paid. That's what you're going to be asking for. And she was like, oh, that's so funny because when I spoke to them, they said like a lower offer is all that, like that is the highest offer they can give me. And I was like, absolutely not. It's this or walk. And I said, by the way, just to let you know, they are short staffed. So you kind of have the upper hand. And I
Right.
have to say, like, this idea that like she would be my rival was so pervasive, right? And like, why would you deploy information, like important information that benefits someone else? Like it could hurt you. And I just don't buy that. Right. And I was so glad when she was hired because like that's how we're going to change things. If you're going to sit there and be like, nope, like I'm squirreling this away from myself, like it doesn't work like that. It just creates a worse environment for you and for others.
Yeah, and I think, you touch on that in the whole concept of like radical generosity. I would
Mm.
love for you to share more about like what does that mean to you and what does that mean kind of within this framework?
Yeah, yeah. Radical generosity, I have to say, I'm careful because I want people to read the book and not misunderstand it, right? As much as
Understood.
again,
Yes.
as
Yeah.
you can, you'll be
Don't
able
give
to.
away all the secrets of the book. No, I
I'll tell you this. I know I've already brought up Oprah. I'll bring her up again as much as I'd like to be like, you get a car and you get a home and you get a mansion, you get a,
yeah, right.
Um, but the core principle of radical generosity, which feeds into this idea of uncompete, like building a world where more of us don't approach everything with a competition at all costs mindset and approach. One of the core tenets or principles of this framework is radical generosity, and the idea that like we really have to put into the world what we want to see back for us, right? And so radical generosity is very much something along the lines of like helping other people in their careers, making referrals and recommendations, even if the world would tell us like, hey, you're rivals, or you shouldn't really get along, or you shouldn't really help each other. It's really pushing back against that idea and investing in a way that's meaningful, that's like skin in the game, without the belief that you should be immediately receive like reciprocal energy immediately, right? And this is hard. This is hard. I had radical generosity sort of misused? Absolutely, right? I have. And I have so many more times when I've put out generosity into the world, I have received generosity from not always the same source, but from other sources. And I think this is something it might feel a little bit like, oh, she's being really philosophical and a bit woo-woo here. but it is so important to cultivate that goodwill, again, especially in our workplace relationships, especially in our communities, because I really think that's how we're going to navigate this world where there are polycrises, which is volatile and uncertain and all of those good things, like or bad things, we really, really need to band together in these times.
Well, the example that you just gave of, advising someone that was going to be joining your organization, that isn't just a, hey, what am I going to get from it? It is also a, what is the company going to get if we hire this amazing person to come in that has the skills and is able to contribute and is able to give, into the organization and feel valued. They're going to have a very different experience than if they come in and they realize, 6 months in, oh, wow, I kind of got shortchanged on this job. So why am I engaged? Why am I excited to be here? So that is absolutely, in my mind, paying it forward and kind of putting out into the universe what you would want to have someone do for you, or, you know, because of you, whatever you want to, however you want to frame it. So, I think that radical generosity, and I will tell you, and Jackye knows this, and it's kind of a running joke with us because she knows that I have the memory of, the worst memory ever. But I've had many times when it's been hey, this thing happened and I'm not sure how this person remembers me, or how, I don't know what conversation occurred or whatever it might be, and it's always like something coming that is unexpected and positive. Which is, it just shows that it does actually work. And it maybe it is a little fluffy, you're right. But at the same time, I think it is, what you're putting out in the universe is what you get back. So for sure.
I mean, to me, I look at the science around gratitude, which is research backed, right? It's this idea of like, do you think the world owes you something, or do you think that like you have a part to play in the world and that you're grateful for what you have and that you have the ability to pay it forward, right? And the research around gratitude is really powerful. Grateful individuals, people who keep, one of the most powerful ways to have better mental health, have a more positive outlook in life, feel more engaged even in the workplace, but certainly in society, is by engaging in gratitude practices, right? Whether it could be writing it down or saying it out loud, or being sort of in communities where you get to express what you're grateful for. But again, having this like core belief that like things are happening for me and not to me. And even though, again, it may sound a little fluffy, I have seen it in action, and I have written about, it in Uncompete. And this has been people who are in the workplace, people who have their own organizations like myself, and people out in society. Like, we really do have a responsibility and a very powerful role to play in creating organization culture that we want to see and thrive in.
Well, and I think right now it's such a critical practice though, too, knowing all of the different, like, you can't leave I'm sitting in my little office here. You can't leave your office without feeling like the hits just keep coming on
Yeah,
from every corner.
you're so right.
Yeah, what's going on in society, what's going on, just in every arena. So
Yeah.
having that gratitude practice, whatever that might look like, it is so important that, hey, I woke up today. There's
Yeah.
there's
Yeah.
a big one. So
Yeah,
um,
yeah. And one caveat, which I think is important when I talk about gratitude specifically, it is weaponized against women sometimes, and against women of color specifically, like, oh, you should just be grateful you got this role. It doesn't matter that we're underpaying you severely or whatever it is. So I just want to obviously be very clear,
yes.
like, we can absolutely engage in a gratitude practice and also advocate for ourselves when we are being shortchanged. I mean, both things can be true. And
100%.
again, I think this is where, like, when you create a community of radical generosity, I think people will look out for each other. I've seen people look out for each other in a way that is meaningful.
Well, it also means I laugh. Me and my husband always say, "Oh, you're going to learn today." That's a gift. I might have to advocate for myself and be like, also, I am showing that gratitude. Like, I'm sharing this with you,
Mhm.
Yeah.
or sharing this within the moment. I know that someone has a study somewhere, and if we find them, we'll have them on. But the impact that we've seen in the last 20 years on work because of the opposite of what you're talking about,
Mm.
about the competition, about not being grateful, about not feeling that. I
Mm.
mean, we teach people to look for another job during the interview and negotiation process.
Mm.
And I remember talking to a candidate that says, I always push back on the salary just to see how that's managed within the organization before I make a decision. And again, like on this side of, running TA, but then also as talking to different organizations, it's interesting in the process when you hear people say, this is what they want to call the role because of this situation that happened, like people spilling all of the information, and you're like, wow, how is this a place that we want to work? I mean, we're losing that knowledge. You have to start over, and we're all suffering because of that. Innovation suffers because of that. And I again, I've said this on the podcast several times about how people during engagement surveys, and the one that always stands out was the person that said, can I just go to work and go home? Can I just do that? And I think ultimately that's all what we want to do, is be able to just go to work, do a good job, and leave. But we create these environments where that isn't the culture. And it's so important to be able, we can do so much more together.
You're so right, Jackye. And I have to say, like, when I think of like people, because I'm one of those people, I'm like, can I just go to work and go back home? And certainly when I was in more corporate environments, and especially when I started doing research and work on belonging, equity, and inclusion, people were like, oh, so are you with these, Gen Z who want to like come in and like overshare about their like personal lives and whatever it is? Is that what belonging is? Because I don't want any of that. And I had to actually help leaders understand, like, that is absolutely not what belonging is. And the last thing we want to do is create an environment where people come in, they feel like their managers and leaders have to be their therapists and have to be their sort of like coaches or whatever. Well, yes, coaches, not therapists. And so I used it. I said, this is the example of what belonging is. Now, when I say I want people to feel like they belong, that means if they're part of the LGBTQ community, and especially as someone who grew up in Singapore, which has had a long history because of our sort of British colonization, where it is not safe to be part of the LGBTQ community. Having been from a country like that, it has been so important and fascinating for me to meet individuals who said, the first time I felt like I could be openly gay was in the workplace, right? Because all the time I was in my community at home with my friends and education, all of that, I couldn't be who I was. But I worked for an organization which creates belonging for people, and tell people, like, if you're, no matter who you love, like, you are welcome here. That sort of authenticity and that level of belonging, that's what I want people to come in with. Like, you can be who you are and you're accepted here. That doesn't, again, at all mean, you come in and you overshare. So there's this like discernment, which I think is something that we're kind of questioning in our society today. And I think that tension is important and it's healthy. But again, it's so important for leaders and folks who are, culture builders, to think about, like, how do we create an environment where people can feel like they can belong?
Absolutely.
So I would love to hear, Ruchika, like, what is one thing that you want to make sure folks hear or want to make, other than go read the book as soon as it's out?
Thank
What else
you.
would you like folks to have heard from this conversation?
Yeah, thank you. I mean, I think it's this idea that like competition at all costs is the default and you always have to engage in it. I think it's worth asking. Like, I think, again, if you are in a position where you are able to, create a new role, and maybe there's a promotion process for it where people who are on the same team have to compete with each other. Again, as someone who gets to design that or have some influence on how that process is designed, it's asking, do we need to pit people against each other? Like, do we have to tell people like there's only one role, there's a scarcity, so you better get your sharp elbows out? And what does that do as a result to the organization and its culture, versus is there a different way we could reimagine this? And I've seen people reimagine this. I've seen people say, at this moment, there's only one role, but here's how we're investing in career development, no matter what, no matter who gets the role, right? Being very clear about like how was the role kind of decided, rather than, oh, it was, it was someone's, like, we just picked our favorite, right? Which is unfortunately what we've seen a lot of, right? Where that process is very unclear. So my number one sort of key takeaway would be that I think it is worth examining and pushing back against the idea that competition is the best way and the only way and the default, and really creatively work towards reimagining, like, what could it look like if we didn't always have a competitive outcome to everything?
Awesome. Jackye, what you got?
I think I love the really like sharing. What was the word? It was radical. I forgot the word.
Generosity.
Generosity. I was like,
Yeah.
giving's good,
All of it,
radical
all
gener-
of that, all of
obviously brand new to me. Brand new. No, I haven't thought of it like that. And in the places where you feel safe to do so, to
Totally.
to do that, and be aware if that's like your human nature to feel. And also if your spidey sense goes up where you say, oh, I don't think I can do that, maybe it's time to change your organization, right?
I'm clapping. I'm like silent clapping as Jackye says. Both make that spidey sense, that gut feel. And I write about this in the book, right? Even as someone who has not always met people. I mean, because even the concept of Uncompete, again, isn't necessarily out in the world yet until the book is out. But this idea of like, not everyone is going to think that uncompeting is the way forward. There are going to be a lot of people who still want to work in a competition, rivalry, zero sum, winner take all world and workplace. And if they model that to you, it is okay for you to say, hey, like, I'm not engaging in that. And whether that means, work for a different organization, whether it's have the conversation like, hey, I'm trying to approach things with radical generosity. I don't want to compete with you. How about we talk about what it means to uncompete? And if you're not getting that same connection back from them, it is okay to opt out of that. Like, here I am not saying like, oh, go out there and like let people take advantage of you. Quite
Right.
the contrary. I'm saying be really intentional. And I think sometimes we actually give in to, we ignore our spidey sense actually, because we're just like, oh, this is just the way the world works. And I'm like, no, I refuse to accept that.
I a really quick story that it's just work with me. So people who know me very, very, very well, that's 3 berries, knows that I watch bull riding. That's a whole another conversation. And there was a famous bull rider, and his name is JB Mooney, and he split his skull. He had to retire, and he went back to the guy who had that bull that he was in the ring with, and he asked him what he was going to do with it, and he goes, oh, I think I'm going to just retire him. And he's like, I think I would like to have him. The bull that ended his career now lives on his ranch, and he was like, and this is where he's going to spend the rest of his days, and all he has to do is be a bull. And I just thought that was like the most beautiful thing, where you would think initially like you would never want to see that again, but also having some of the most learning that you can have in those moments. And so as you look back into your career, some of the things that have happened that have been hurtful or problematic, or you didn't think you could handle or manage it, or it was a really bad day, also you get your greatest lessons. And so I wanted to throw that out there because I'll forget it if I don't say that story. Because
I
I feel like
adore this story. Can I just say why I adore it so much more? For two reasons. One is, of course, what you the meaning you made of it. Like sometimes the worst day of your life can actually be the most important. Totally. And I think it tells us that, like, in many times we're in these systems where we are competing against each other, and it's not actually our nature to do that, right? Like, yes, if you're out in the world and a bull and a person meet, like, that's one thing, but this is an artificial kind of competition, right? And like, if you actually extricate yourself from that competitive environment, what does it really feel like to connect with each other in a meaningful way? And I think of this often, like, if I could go back and if I could go meet that rival again, whom, stole my idea, or even along the years, right? Like, I've had, I've had tough experiences with people whom, like, at that time, I was like, I never want to see them again. But when I think back, like, especially I think of some of the tough experiences I've had in the technology industry, I write about it in Inclusion on Purpose specifically. Now that I'm away from the system, now that I've been out of it for over 10 years, I can say very honestly that it was the environment that made it so scarcity driven, so fear driven. Like, you better get your sharp elbows out. Like, if you don't, so and so is gonna, like, take your job. Like, there's no role for you. And I hate who I became in those moments, right? And what would it be like to now meet some of those people again in a different environment when we are not being told that there's only room for one of you to get ahead? Like, what would that be like? Like, I'm so curious, and this story totally makes me think.
yeah. I mean, the thing that he said at the end, he's like, we both had a job to do. The bull
Yeah.
had a job to do, and I had a job to do,
Yeah.
and the bull did his job, and I didn't. And so now I'm at home,
Yeah.
right? So
Yeah.
it was like, how many times was I in the situation and looked at it from that reference and didn't
Yeah.
frame it as we both had a job to do, we
Yeah.
both had an assignment, and
Yeah.
it wasn't my day
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
you know. Anyway,
Yeah.
we
So
now
Jackye,
putting in
not to
45
not
minutes.
to compete with you because I do not have a bull riding story.
I know.
But
Although,
that's what
yeah,
I'll do the next time I come on this podcast. I'll be like, okay, let me
Bring a
go
bull
check
rider.
that bull.
bull riding. Yeah, yeah. Well, and the funny part is Jackye and I are in Texas and Arizona, respectively, so we can actually go see live bull riding pretty much at least every week, at least once. So,
So interesting.
yeah, welcome to our world. Yeah, so I think the piece that I want folks to have heard from this is really on that abundance mindset, and not because it's something maybe folks haven't heard before, but I think it's such a good reminder and something that is so critical for us to always be focused on, of just there is this innate thought that we have to compete versus no, there's enough for all of us. And and we just get better when we are collaborating, when we are working together, when we are keeping inclusion in mind. And so, I think that one, as I look at the framework and just in listening to this conversation, I think it's one of those things that abundance mindset is one that I always want to, keep front and center. So would love for folks to have heard that. But Ruchika, thank you. This has been awesome. So when does your book come out?
November 4th.
Oh, wowzers, trousers. So you're less than a month. Oh my
I'm
God.
less than a month. And it's really interesting. It was like, I was like, do in the summer. And then, like, it turned to October 1st. And I feel like I'm on a runaway train.
Yeah.
So
And,
thank
and
you.
you are, right? Because once you go live, you're on a tour, right?
Oh,
You're
yeah.
in it.
There is.
Okay.
Yes.
Awesome.
There will
Very
be.
cool. Well, that's so exciting. I know it'll be tiring, but that's very exciting at the same time.
Thank you.
Where can folks find you?
I'm very active on LinkedIn, maybe a little bit too opinionated. So you can look me up, Ruchika T. Malhotra, where I also have a LinkedIn newsletter, the Uncompete newsletter. And my website is Ruchika, so RUCHIKA.co.
Awesome. Very cool. Well, thank you so much for joining us today. It's been awesome to chat with you and catch up. This is Katee Van Horn.
And this is Jackye Clayton.
Bye.